Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's EMIC Academy on this rather miserable Wednesday morning, but I think the topic today will brighten our moods for sure. This is the third in a trilogy of sessions on the broad topic risk best practice, moving from good to better. And for those of you for whom this is the third, you'll remember that we've traveled through the risk journey of cyber and social engineering and risk profiling. And today we land on what I think is a very topical topic right now, as we're I'm not quite sure whether we're midway through a pandemic. We might be near the end. We might be nearer the start, who knows? But you know, the challenge that many organizations face in balancing what is absolutely emerging as a 24/7 culture, never being off duty, of globalization, and the requirements to satisfy client needs, but at the same time ensuring that our staff and our colleagues are properly supported and their well-being is looked after. And as I say, never more so has this been under greater scrutiny as we feel the impact of lockdown, the opportunity of reopening differently for many organizations, and the focus of accelerating maybe changes or refinements in operational processes, the way we communicate with our clients and our customers and our colleagues, and overall business model diversity. So we live in, you know, we've said for some time, you know, change is all around us. Change is the only reliable constant, but I think this is a particularly timely session. So looking just at the logistics for today, I'll introduce Jo, who you can see on your screen shortly. There'll be a formal discussion around a few slides that Jo has prepared on the topic, and following the presentation, there'll be a Q&A session before we wrap up at round and about 11 o'clock. You'll see on your GoToWebinar control panel that there's a drop down called questions, and that's the place for you to pose your questions that I will handle on your behalf before the session is out. So please, at any stage, if anything occurs to you, please feel free to table those. The slides and a recording are likely to be shared with you following the session, so you'll receive what we can. Obviously, EMIC sessions are Chatham House rules, but you know, Jo, particularly as a lawyer, will be very conscious of observing client confidentialities, but I know comes from a very open and transparent disposition. If you have trouble seeing your control panel, you may see either an icon on the side or the bottom of your screen, the Go To icon, which is orange, and or a white arrow with an orange background, and that is the reveal and hide button of your panel. You'll also notice at the top of the first slide that you can see now, there are three very small horizontal lines. That allows you to make the slide that you're looking at, it's your own personal slider, so you can make it bigger or larger dependent on whether you want to see more of Jo or less of Jo, or more of the slide or less of the slide. So moving on, let me introduce you to Jo. So Jo is currently Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Allen and Overy, and Jo is responsible for the delivery of the firm's diversity and inclusion strategy. She began her career as a tax advisor before moving into diversity and corporate responsibility, and has more than 20 years of experience in professional service firms. So she has a wide range of experience in designing and delivering cultural change programs that helps increase diversity and improve inclusive work practices. So I can't think of anybody better to present today's material. And with that, let me hand over to you, please, Jo.
Thanks, Patrick. And thank you for dialing in today. So as Patrick said, I'm Jo Dooley. I'm Head of Diversity at Allen & Overy. I've been at Allen & Overy now for about 5 years, and I'm responsible for designing and delivering the whole diversity and inclusion agenda. And it's interesting. It's been an interesting week on this, with lots of diversity issues playing out in the news that you might have seen. And I often reflect that diversity and inclusion can be, it's a slow game. You know what you want to achieve, and you you design that, and you know it's going to take a long time to deliver. But then you have moments which just catapult you from where you are in that moment to 10 years hence. And really, I think COVID-19 has been one of those moments on this topic. Had I have been talking, it was when we first decided to do this session. I think the original working title was "The War for Talent and Flexibility." I don't think anybody's really talking about the war for talent at this particular moment, but everybody is talking about flexibility. And overnight, it just became the thing that everybody was doing. And again, you know, in terms of my own experience on this, I think if Allen & Overy had have said at the beginning of 2020 that we wanted to be a virtual law firm, we would have said, okay, let's set up a project group, we'll get some consultants in, it's probably a good 5 to 10 year aspiration. And then in the event, we had to do it over a weekend. The whole global organisation went virtual over a weekend, and has pretty much stayed that way, actually. Although some of our offices around the world are now going back to their actual office space. So I just wanted to set the context today, because I am going to talk about flexible working, the challenges, getting it right, but I'm also going to talk about the new world, the world that we now find ourselves in terms of COVID-19, and how that's, as I say, catapulted the agenda forward, but equally, you know, some of the things that we're learning along the way that are the new challenges, the new normal that we're having to deal with. I believe there's an opportunity for you to ask questions, and very, very happy to receive them. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the ANO approach to flexible working. We're very lucky to have a senior partner who talks out loud on this topic whenever he's given the opportunity. And he just talks about flexible working as being a human issue, about people delivering their best work, and not putting lots of policies and things around it, but it being about trust. And we talk about the ANO people being ambitious, and smart and driven, and we know that they know their jobs better than anybody else in the firm. So we trust people to get it right. Now, we are a 24/7 culture. We have over 40 offices around the world in lots of different time zones, and you know, we all work to that. The legal industry is famous for having client demands and being able to respond to those. So our people work really, really hard. But the question then arises, why do we make their lives harder by being rigid around the way that we work? So when we entered the COVID-19 world, we were already fairly well advanced on this agenda. And that's not to say that we didn't have pockets where it was harder and practices where there was some resistance to flexible working. But it is to say that I think we were already in a fairly good place, because for a number of years, we'd already been talking about flexible working as just the way things are. I would also say that we make a distinction between flexible working and agile working. So flexible working we talk about in terms of formal flexibility. So people changing their contractual arrangements with the firm, whether that be on the number of days a week that they work, or we have term time working, job sharing, a number of formal arrangements that, and I think the other thing that I would say about flexible working is there are as many different arrangements as there are people. And I'll talk later about one size really does fit all on this topic. But we also talk about agile working, and that's even for those people on a formal flexible working arrangements, or those people who just have normal contractual hours. Agile working is about being agile in the way that you do that. So for a number of years, we've had our iFlex policy, which has said that you can work remotely without permission. You just need to let people know where you are, obviously, but you don't need to ask permission at any point, and trust and common sense apply to that relationship. Of course, client service is above all, and we can't let client service standards drop. But again, our people know what that means. They know what it means to service their clients and to do it well. And I think one of the things that I would say about this agenda is, again, just in the interest of honesty, one of the things that often hijacks it is people saying, but what if people abuse the system? What if they, are sitting at home with their feet up and things like that? And I think the thing that we would say is that you can't kind of engineer things for the lowest common denominator. If you don't trust your people to work remotely, particularly when you're trusting them to deliver quite high risk work, it feels like quite a small thing to ask that people, if you can't see them, that they're still working. So as I say, we say that the old employer control mechanisms don't apply. Trust, common sense, and client service very much do, but we trust people to understand what that means. And with that, I thought I'd give you a few pointers on what I think are best practice in this area. This is the Jo Dooley version of best practice. It's not necessarily the textbook version. And it is a list that I have accumulated from many years of experience of trying to implement some of this work. So first of all, I would say it's gender neutral. If you talk about flexibility in terms of women and in terms of working mums, it really doesn't help anybody, particularly those women that you're probably trying to help with the flexible working policy. It's something which I think, well, we do know, we have the research to show us that it does hinder women's careers. We do it for benevolent reasons. We want to help people. We want to help women have a career and be able to manage their family lives. But that narrative in itself is something, and the biases attached to that narrative are something that hold women's careers back. And our men want to work flexibly too. Of course they do. We live in an age where our men want to be hands-on with their family, and they want to work flexibly as well. And again, if flexibility is all about women, if we make it something for 50% of the population, and the other 50% get to work, 80 hours a week and really kind of focus on driving their career forward, we're going to kind of maintain the status quo on women's careers. So the gender neutral point is really, really important. And in that vein, I would say we talk about parenting as a gender neutral issue as well. So we don't talk about working mums, we talk about working parents. And that being a 50-50 relationship and doing what we can to help both parties in that relationship. The why doesn't matter. So I just talked a lot about family and parenting, but again, that's not helpful in terms of the narrative on flexible working. The why really doesn't matter. It could be that people want to work at home because they have other caring, or they want to work flexibly because they have other caring responsibilities, because they have particular goals around hobbies and things that they want to achieve, because they have a dog that they want to make sure is walked once a day, or just because that's the way they'd work best. I speak for myself on this topic. I'm an introvert, and up to this point, I've always worked at home for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, a day a week, just to give myself the headspace to kind of work out what's going on, give myself the space I need to really concentrate on some of the things that I need to focus on. As an introvert, it really is what I need to be to function. Now, I might have a pretty extreme version of that now, having been working at home for 5 days a week for the last 12 weeks or so, and who goodness knows how long I'm going to be working at home for. But it really is about adapting to people's working styles. And it's quite interesting. I'll come on to talk about COVID-19, but I think, we're learning more about people's habits and productivity during this period as flexible workers. So one size does not fit all. And as I said earlier, there are as many flexible working arrangements as there are people who work flexibly. Again, I remember when I was starting my job at A&O, and I was in one of my interviews, and the person interviewing me said, "Do you want to talk about flexible working?" And I said, "I do, but I can't tell you what I need because I have two children. They're currently 9 and 10. They're currently doing their homework at the table downstairs. But the flexibility that I need will change from week to week. In some weeks, it might be an assembly I need to attend. And in some weeks, it might be a sports day or something else. It's going to be on different days of the week, different times of the day. And so what the conversation I want to have about flexibility is about being flexible week to week, and you understanding that I am passionate about my job and dedicated, and you can trust me to get on with it. And I was really delighted that that conversation was received very well, and in fact has been the way that I work throughout my career at A&O and previously, actually. So again, it goes back to that point about trust. And equally, in terms of formal flexibility, if somebody needs staggered hours or reduced days of the week or things like that, we can't take that as a commentary on their dedication to their career. I like to think of, we're all living a life. We're all trying to kind of carve out a life that involves work and everything else that we might be trying to achieve in that life. And the two have to fit together. So one size very much does not fit all on this topic. The other thing that another thing that I've learned is about leading by example. It's not enough to say, we've got a great policy on flexible working, make sure you read it, and of course, make sure you take advantage of it. It's not enough to say out loud, we really care about flexible working and our people should be working flexibly. People have to see that the leaders of the business are doing it. And it's a hurdle that pre-COVID-19 we were jumping again and again. We would hear people in the business say, well, you tell me it's fine to work flexibly, but actually when I look around me, the partners are in the office all the time, and the work goes to the people who are sitting at their desks, and if I'm not there seen to be sitting at my desk, I won't get the work. Now, as I said, that was pockets. There were pockets that had cracked this a long time ago and worked beautifully on a very flexible basis, but that was a challenge. And so the thing that we were saying to the leaders of the business is, you need to be leading by example. You need to be showing that you're working flexibly, that you are working at home when you can, that you are leaving the office and you're not sneaking out of the office or pretending you've got a meeting, but you're really open about why you're leaving and what you're leaving for. And that's interesting, I guess, in the light of COVID-19 as well. Because as we think about starting to move back into the offices, there is a danger that we'll go back to old habits on this. So it is a conversation that we need to keep. We need to keep up with the leadership, the partners in the business, is that people are watching about and what they do in this area. I've talked about blending the informal and formal flexibility. It's not a either or. You don't have a formal flexible working arrangement, and that means you don't get any informal flexibility around it. It's about a blend of the two. So just because you work 3 days a week, there's no reason why every week or some weeks that can be one of those days a week couldn't be at home. We have people who are on flexible working arrangements, formal flexible working arrangements, but it doesn't always work out in terms of their workload. If we have somebody who doesn't work on a Friday, but they need to be in court on a Friday, we talk to them about making sure that they take that time elsewhere. It isn't on the slides, but one thing we've also introduced recently, which has served us very well, is we do pay for time that people spend working above their contractual arrangements. So it's not necessarily the odd hour here and there, but if people are working a whole half day or day beyond their contractual arrangements during the week, then we do pay for that time. So again, if we have a lawyer who doesn't work on a Friday but needs to be in court on a Friday, we will make sure they're paid. And that again has been a bit of a game changer on this, because it's told those people that we respect their time, we value their time, and we see when their work might not be kind of conducive to their working setup, and we'll reward them for that. I'd say trial and dialogue is really important. So quite often when we talk about flexible working, and this is really important as well when people are coming back from parental leave, maternity and shared parental leave, you quite often have quite fixed ideas about how the world is going to be when you come back from those leaves. And those of you who've been through it will know that it doesn't always work out in practice quite how you hoped it would. And equally from the business's point of view, we might have ideas about what will and won't work, and in practice we prove things are different. It's keeping an open mind about those things, keeping track of them and talking about them. And that we help with that conversation in a number of ways. So our HR community would help with that, but also it's a very live discussion in all of the parental coaching that we offer both our men and our women. That we offer sessions to them before they go on leave, while they're on leave, and when they come back. And that's a live conversation in each of those discussions. How are things really working out in practice? Are they working out as you thought they would, from a work and a home perspective? And if not, what might we do to change things? The last point is around data security and confidentiality. I've already said client service above everything else, but equally the work that we do is often very sensitive, very confidential, and we do risk data breaches if we are not careful on that. So we remind people lots, and some of the things that we put in place to make sure that data security and confidentiality are kept to the top of the list is we can only work through the ANR systems. So I'm talking to you currently logged on through the ANR systems. I'm not allowed to forward emails to my personal account and that kind of thing. So that's all. If I'm working in a shared space, I'm expected to have a privacy screen so that people can't necessarily be reading what's on my screen. I'm strongly encouraged not to print at home, but if I do, then I should be either shredding using a cross shredder or making sure that I'm keeping the papers to take back and dispose of confidentially when we're back in the office. So we're constantly reminding people of their obligations on that front. And wrapping up all of this in terms of best practice, the thing that I would say is, and it cuts across all of these, is this is about two-way flexibility. This is about a grown-up relationship between the employer and the employee, where we accept that flexibility cuts both ways. So if work expects flexibility, then equally the individual has the right to ask for flexibility in the other direction. And I think, as I say, it's a grown-up relationship, a grown-up conversation in that respect. So COVID-19 has shown us what's possible, and it really has. And it's also presented some issues, and these are very live issues for us as we talk about going back into our offices and what that means. And we know that we have a number of people who are very happy working like this. They've surprised themselves on it, and are very, they're very collaborative with their colleagues. They're very productive. They're seeing the benefits on their own well-being of having a bit of extra time. Not having the ridiculous commutes that those of us who live in London have. But we're seeing the other side of that too. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is we have a survey that goes out to all staff every 2 weeks, asking them, and it's the same survey that goes out because we're very aware that people's feelings can change over time. And the survey really just asks how people are feeling about their working arrangements. What are the challenges that they're feeling, and what they think the firm could do to help with that. So, from a personal perspective, I quite often tick the box that says one of the challenges that I'm having is the divide between home and work. As I say, I've got 2 children who are homeschooling at the moment, and that's quite difficult when you're attached to the phone all day. Now, it's hard, isn't it? Because there's not a lot A&O can do about that. They can't fix the fact that none of our children are in school at the moment. And they can't necessarily fix how I feel about it, but they can understand, they can ask the question, and they can try and understand how I'm feeling about it, and then look for other ways to help me and help others who feel the same around this topic, whether that be talks on mental health, talks on creating the divide, talks on giving yourself a break on some of this and knowing it won't last forever. And that it really is a kind of, well, hopefully it's a short period in our lives. We're learning that supervision is an issue. We knew this before. So we work in an industry where we take in around 100 trainees in the legal world every year, and part of their training contract is that they have to be supervised in the work that they're doing. That's quite difficult in the way we're working at the moment, and we are working with our trainee supervisors to help them make sure that they're having regular contact with their trainees, helping them understand again how the trainees are feeling. It comes out of some of our surveys, but how are the trainees feeling? Where are the gaps? Because particularly at that junior level, people are not always willing to speak up and tell you how they're feeling. They'll quietly try and get on with things, and the difficulties are not necessarily apparent. So really keeping that point front of mind. I think this whole situation has pushed us to recognise what is deliverable outside of the office. We had one of the barriers to flexible working before COVID-19 was we used to hear, no, I'm sorry, that can't be delivered outside of the office. People need to be in the office. We saw this a lot with our PAs, for instance. How can a PA do their job if they're not there looking at the people that they're working for? Well, having been pushed into a situation where we've had to make it work, sure enough, it really works. Our peers are still answering the phones. They're still working, with the people that they work for to make sure diaries are managed and work is completed. And they're just as conscientious and smart as everybody else. Of course they are. And that's true even down to our print room. So can we really deliver a printing service when we're not working in the office? Well, it turns out we can. Our printer, people who would normally have in our own print room are now shifting their work to work with local providers on printing, and to make sure and to liaise with the one person that we might have working in the print room in the office. So it's challenged us in all kinds of ways. I mean, it's also been apparent that there are some services that really can't be delivered in the office, for instance, reception services and things like that. But, that again will come back in time. It's made us think more about presenteeism too. What does presenteeism look like? If you're in an office situation, it looks like people sitting at their desks till, late into the evening, wanting to be seen, waiting to be handed that piece of work. We can't do that anymore in this space. And we're working with all of our people to help them understand that we want to make sure that the things that we're learning and the changes that we're making now that we know work are something that carries on long after COVID, and we take the best from this period. So I thought I'd come on to talk a little bit about getting it right in practice. And again, some of this I've already covered, but I just thought I would put it all in one space. So getting it right in practice, I think the 3 things that we are looking at are, in terms of knowing whether we're getting it right, is what is the impact on people's well-being? Are they collaborating? Collaboration is a huge part of the A&O culture. And are they collaborating, and how can we help them? And what does productivity look like? Is productivity slipping? We know that productivity isn't slipping, and people are telling us that they are at least as productive at home, or in some cases more productive than they would be if they're in the office. We know that our people are collaborating, they're really talking to each other. I think about the number of hours a day I spend on calls like this one, where I'm looking at other people on the screen. I'm instant messaging, I'm emailing all day, I'm picking up the phone to people in a way that I might not have done had I been in the office. So collaboration is definitely not slipping. And well-being is a strange one at this time, because there are things that are having obviously kind of impacting on how we all feel about the world. But in terms of work, what we're hearing is people's relationship with work is improving. They are spending more time exercising than they previously were. They're spending more time outdoors with their families, and that is really having an impact on how they feel. Now, as I say, there are other complicating factors around well-being at the moment, but in terms of relationship with work, we're working hard to get that right. And around the edges here, I've got some of the ways that we're making that happen. So leadership messages on this topic are proving to be key. Our senior partner is doing a weekly blog at the moment. He is working from his home in Belgium. He is sharing his own experience of working at home, of working flexibly, including, the fact that he's enjoying having more time with his family than he's had in a number of years, and not having to spend all of his days on a plane as he might have been a few months ago. And he's been really open about that. Sometimes he writes it down. Sometimes we see a video of him sitting in his office at home in his casual wear, and it really, really resonates with people. What he also shares in those leadership messages is what he's hearing from other people. We have quite an open kind of culture at ANO, and he invites people to say, this is how I'm feeling. Tell me, how are you feeling? He gets lots of emails every week or telephone calls or whatever it might be. And he shares some of those with permission, but he shares some of how other people are feeling. And he's been able to present lots of different perspectives on this topic. So people with families, people who might be living by themselves, and be kind of trying to combat the loneliness side of things. It's really, really helped. We've also covered some other aspects of life in lockdown, including being LGBT in lockdown, and how it might be for some of our people around the world who, having had kind of quite active social lives in the LGBT space, now find that that is taken away. Or they might be going back to family homes where the atmosphere, the culture around being LGBT is not as conducive as being in the workplace. So we've featured that. We've talked about Ramadan in lockdown and how people are feeling about that. So really being quite open on, in a number of ways, on having a number of different perspectives. We're learning that line manager support is key to all of this. That day-to-day interaction. I've mentioned the supervision point with the more junior staff, but I think it's key for all of us really. Our line managers checking in on how people are feeling. Not necessarily, I mean, definitely not kind of micromanaging to-do lists and things like that, but just are people coping with the way that they work? And again, that has to be true outside of COVID times. Being kind of having a great relationship with your line manager is something that really can make or break a flexible working arrangement. We're encouraging people to look at their workspace. Now, lots of us don't have a choice on this at the moment. We've got people, who do have to work at their kitchen tables, who are living in shared accommodation, and there are challenges around that. We've been forced into this situation. But as far as we can, encouraging people to know what a good workspace looks like, what a good chair looks like, what the height of your screen should be when you're working. the fact that ideally you would have a natural source of light, that kind of thing. Now, as I said, that's not easy because people have been forced into this situation and are working in lots of different ways. But I think that people are getting to grips with that as well. Confidentiality, I've already mentioned. Again, with people working in in less than ideal workspaces, making sure that we really keep an eye on that, and that we are constantly monitoring the confidentiality point and data security to make sure we don't have any breaches. We're asking people to add structure to their working day, to make sure that they do get up at the same time every day, and that they are getting dressed for work, not from a kind of not from a point of being quite militant about how people should work, really not that, but really from a well-being point of view, helping people to understand how they can let other people know what their day looks like and what their boundaries look like. So making sure that they're keeping their diary up to date, not just with the work meetings, but with the next point is about taking breaks, making sure they've got proper breaks in their diaries, whether that be lunch or whether that be walking the dog in the afternoon, the run that you plan to have at a particular day. Make sure it's in the diary so that people are not treading on your time and not just imposing themselves. One of the things that I've had to do in lockdown is to make sure that I have a chunk of time every day around lunchtime to take some time out, partly to make sure that my kids don't just eat crisps for lunch, and partly to make sure that I'm getting some some quality time with them and taking some time to work out what they've been doing today. We're encouraging people to speak up. So if they are struggling, we need to know. As I say, so we're doing that on a kind of big basis with these surveys every couple of weeks to get a temperature check on how people are feeling generally. But more day to day, if you're struggling, you pick up the phone to your line manager or a colleague, and you have the conversation that today is a tough day, or you're having a tough week, or you're really not coping with a particular aspect of this. And making sure that people switch off, just as they would if they were leaving the office. It's very tempting to just leave your computer on, all the time. I know I occasionally, particularly if I'm busy, I'm terrible for leaving my computer on, thinking I'll just pop back upstairs and at 8 o'clock and have a quick look at my emails. It's not good for mental health, and we need to make sure that people realise that. Before I finish, I just want to take a step back. Actually, there's something I didn't mention on the COVID-19 point. It's one of the things that is becoming apparent on this is, again, interest for me from a diversity perspective, is that it's in the news a lot that the women in particular are picking up more of the domestic duties at home than men at the moment. And from a diversity perspective, that does concern me, partly because it could be true. And again, I say this from my personal perspective. In my situation, it's very much 50-50 at home. My husband knows that I'm on a call now. He's there to deal with the children if need to. But in some houses, that it is true. I'm hearing comments like, I feel more like a 50s housewife than I ever thought I would. And that has implications for the immediate in terms of what people are doing, but also it has implications for the long term in terms of people's careers, the opportunities that they're not being able to take advantage of now, which we know are the things that will progress their careers. I also have a concern around benevolent bias. And for those of you who don't know that term, it's bias that comes from a really good place, a caring place. So we quite often see it in a maternity situation, for instance, somebody who's just come back from maternity leave. You might say, I'm not going to give her this piece of work because she's got a lot going on at the moment. I don't want to push her over the edge. She needs a slow introduction back in. Now that decision comes from a good place, but it is something, while you've made that decision about one person, another person has been given the opportunity. And they've gained experience and they've built their network, and that all of that will take them to the next point in their career. And I think we need to keep an eye on this topic, because even sometimes when we think we're doing the right thing, by helping people that we can see are having difficulties. And it's not, in the current situation, it's not just about family responsibilities, it's about wider caring responsibilities. It's about people that you can see who are struggling with this situation, might be, they might be having battles with their own mental health. And I'm very much not saying pile the work on anyway, just give them it. I'm really not saying that. What I am saying is have the conversation, talk to them, so they can help. You can both have a dialogue about what is actually going on. One of the things that we said to all of our line managers when we could see that we were going into lockdown is don't make assumptions about people's setup, about their kind of appetite. Please have the conversation, and equally help them understand what the pressures you're under, what you need to get done, and treat that as a dialogue rather than making assumptions and therefore decisions about work that goes one way or not. So that was all I was going to say. I hope that's been helpful.
Jo, that's fantastic, and thanks for taking us through a whole raft of points. I think that obviously have been important in the historically in the recent past and also right now. I've got a couple of questions that have come in on a sort of related topic, so I might sort of join them together for you. And the first is a point that David Ross has made around, if you like, the fit for purpose workspace that people have in their office, assuming that they're office based. And how do you manage the transition between, if you imagine the scene, an ergonomically high quality office chair, maybe an adjustable desk, 2 large screens,
Yep.
The stationery cupboard down the corner, to what could be a reality for many working from home, either as part of this pandemic or not, where you might be peering over the kind of 11.5-inch screen of a laptop, using your dining room chair or your bedroom stool. I just wondered whether you wanted to talk a bit about an employer's obligation to make sure that the tools to work effectively from home, either on a permanent or semi-permanent basis, and that might include things like broadband and those kinds of things, together with a related question from David Roberts. Thank you, David. Just for any pointers on how employers might actually, how can I say, assess the working from home workspace, really from a risk assessment process, because obviously an employer's duties stretch beyond the issuing of a policy and procedure into actually validating that the right things are happening. So sorry, I'm rambling, but if you could give us feedback on those 3 points.
Yeah, and they are related. In some ways, the second one is the easier point. So from our point of view, we are offering online risk assessments. So you can have a session with a physio, as you would in the office, where they will, with use of your camera, they will take you through an assessment of what your home setup looks like, how you're sitting, and what you can do to improve that. And where people have health conditions that they're managing, we are providing equipment to help them improve their the setup at home. So that is happening. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when we first went into lockdown, I guess we all assumed it would be a few weeks. And so if we were peering over laptop, oh well, it's fine, it's just a few weeks. And now we're looking at this and thinking, well, I mean, I don't expect to be in the office before September, and if I'm honest, I'm probably looking before that. It's turned into a much kind of a longer thing, and all of the messages from A&O are actually, we don't want you to go back to normal. Even if we could open the office tomorrow, 5 days a week, and have 100% of people in, which we can't, but if we could, we don't want you to work like that anymore. So we, having gone through the initial, kind of flurry of just getting everybody set up from home. We're now looking at longer term solutions, IT equipment. So we have something on our intranet site where I can go and log on, and I can request a second screen, I can request a laptop stand, cordless keyboards and things like that, just to make sure that my setup at home is conducive to me working and to me managing my health while we're doing that. Having said that, not everybody has the luxury. I'm sitting and talking to you now in a room that is dedicated, that I have dedicated for a long time, to working from home. That's not the reality for lots of people. And if you're living in shared accommodation, or you're you're kind of working at the kitchen table and things like that, you don't necessarily want lots of screens and ergonomic chairs delivered to your house. So we're managing that. We're on a case-by-case basis. We're having the conversations, giving people what they need, but we're not we're not making that a kind of blanket for everybody. And I would point out that that's just in the UK. Around the world, there are different rules on this, and they are more or less kind of stringent in terms of what you have to provide for people working at home. So it really, really does vary across the world. But that's a little insight into what we're doing from a work perspective.
Yeah, I think this is a good point as to where risk might align to strategy, because I think the point you make is quite correct, Jo, in that whilst COVID-19 has forced us into a different way of operating, many organisations may be simply thinking that when it's all over, we just go back to the way we were. Many might be thinking, actually, this is a glimpse of how we want to work differently in the future. So I think for a risk manager, trying to get under the skin of how the organisation is thinking through the potential change in business practices has an implication on things like employers' liability, on the management of people risk, because of course it's a potential game changer. And I think those organisations that overlook the implications of an ongoing change, as well as the kind of in the eye of the needle position we find ourselves in, may suffer as a result. I think another point I was going to make, and in fact Claire Coombs has kind of made it for me, is the surprise that during lockdown, how many individuals who live on their own actually want to come back to the office just for social interaction. I mean, the point I think I was going to make was that the assumption that people strike the work-life balance when they can come and go as they please, it sort of emphasizes, I think, the one size doesn't fit all point that you made. Actually, some people's relationships survive primarily because they don't see each other from Monday to Friday. Other people's relationships are enhanced when they can see more of each other. So I think being very sensitive to those, but actually for those organizations believing that working from home now may be the way we do it, I think are losing sight of the point you made around flexibility, and that for some people home is the island that they like, and for others the office is the island that they like.
It's an interesting moment to be having that conversation. So again, I think what we've learned is there's a colleague of mine who when we went into lockdown, she does live by herself, and she knew that we were going into lockdown, and not only was she going to be working by herself every day, but she wasn't even going to be able to kind of go and see her mum and dad around the corner and that kind of thing. It really was going to be just her, and she was quite upset about that and worried about it. And actually, the lived experience, she said, you know what, I'm actually quite enjoying it. It's great. It's not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. But then we do have people, on the other hand, who we can see are really struggling. And one of the things that we are saying to line managers is don't wait to be told that people are struggling. Make sure that you're using video cameras and you're looking for the signs. whether somebody looks tired, whether they look, you know, bedraggled, that kind of thing. Be sensitive and find ways of opening the conversation about how are you feeling. Because not everybody will volunteer that information. Are people reluctant to switch on their video cameras and talk to you? Is another thing that we've been talking about, and if so, why might that be the case? So really making people aware. But we, as I said, we do know that we've got people who are struggling with the mental health side of things. We are talking to them about, you know, about perhaps when the office reopens, and it isn't, we're not there yet, making, you know, there will be priority in terms of being allowed back into the office, but also making them aware that that office is not going to look the way it did when they left. So if they're hoping to go back to an office where they get to see people and they get to sit down and have lunch with somebody every day, that's not going to be the reality. We're going to be operating social distancing. Probably, well, definitely split teams going back into offices, and even then we know we're not encouraging all teams to be in. So it might be a change of scene for them, but not necessarily give them the social interaction that they were hoping for.
Yeah, so finding new and innovative ways to recreate that social interaction is probably key to most organisations. Just sort of moving on, if I might, in terms of the management of risk, do you think that managing people or the way in which firms manage people and how well it's embedded in organisations should be critical to supply chain or vendor selection decisions? And if I predict you're likely to say it's important, how would this be investigated? How would you monitor your critical partners' reaction or management of the kinds of issues that you've been talking about?
So it's not necessarily my area of expertise, but speaking from what I do know, of course, we think it's important. And of course, we were very concerned when all of this happened. You know, for instance, the catering facilities that we have at Allen & Overy, what happened to those people when overnight we didn't need them anymore? So we worked very closely with our suppliers to make sure that those people were looked after. And that they're doing the right thing. I think going forward, there's going to be even more challenges in that respect because the way that we work is going to change. But we've always been an employer who want to make sure that people are looking after, the people we work with are looking after their people, just as our clients expect of us, actually. And so one of the things that we've recently done is we've signed up to the Mental Health Charter, to say that so the way that we work with our own clients when they're putting pressures on us around the way people work, whether that's, you know, kind of reasonable, unreasonable demands on work, that kind of thing, that we'll have the conversation with them. But equally, we're now kind of looking at how we work with our suppliers on that. We want them to tell us when the things that we're requesting are unreasonable. And how we might work together, because it's no good kind of developing this Allen & Overy way of doing things and then just expecting everybody else to kind of fit into that. This is a human issue where we need to be kind of having the dialogue with each other. I think there are probably other experts who will tell you how that plays out in practice in terms of scorecards and all of that, but I'm probably not the right person to have it.
Great. Well, thanks for giving the view. And I think it's one thing looking after the support and management of people in a certain style in your organisation, but actually your grasp may be somewhat eroded if that's not followed through into supply chain and people that you partner with. So thank you for that. Just an interesting question, I think, that obviously putting in the kind of steps and provisions that you make for your people at your firm, but can you outline or quantify the impact of the kind of steps that you've outlined on either quality of work or productivity or any other metrics. You know, for many organizations, investing in people like you and the kind of initiatives costs money, and many organizations, particularly at this time, will be looking at the business case and, you know, what is the return on doing it. So are there any sort of quantification suggestions you can give to us?
Well, we're lucky or not lucky, depending on how you look at it. The way we work is we have the chargeable hour for our lawyers. Anyway, we do. So our lawyers charge their time by 6-minute increments. So we can see whether productivity is dropping or not, whether people are charging less time, and we know that that's not happening. At the moment, that people are charging their time. I think one of the things that we're mindful of is watching, because one of the things that we know, again, through talking to people, through surveys, is that people find it, the way we're working at the moment, quite intense. It's quite, you wake up, you know, you might have your breakfast, a walk, whatever it might be, and then it's just you and a screen all day. And unlike when you're working in the normal working environment where you might step away from your desk to have a meeting, at the moment you're having those meetings in front of a screen where you're watching your emails pop in every few minutes, or you can see that, you know, you're on the phone to one person and the phone is ringing with another person. So productivity is not dropping, and we have the metrics to see that, but equally we know that people are working in a way that is probably not great for them in the long term. And it probably will have implications, and that goes back to some of the things that, you know, really encouraging people to take those breaks, to switch off, to make sure that they know that they don't have to respond in the moment. Just because they can see the email popping in doesn't mean it needs a response now. And helping them, giving them permission and helping them. But in terms of metrics, so yes, we've got the chargeable hour. As I mentioned, we've got the survey that is a kind of a temperature check. Before COVID, we had similar. We have employee surveys, and we always ask about flexibility in those surveys. And not just, the questions range from, do you work flexibly? Do you get the support from your line manager that you need to work flexibly? What difference does it make to your kind of working life? Sam, does that answer your question?
I think so. I think so. So well, thank you very much, Jo. I think all the questions have come in and have been addressed. Just a few observations really from me, I think, before we sign off. I mean, it seems fairly clear that all of the things that you've outlined occur because of the culture in your firm, and actually the people management and support structures that you have is probably a window on the overall corporate culture of any organization. You made a very valid point, I think, around how people mirror the behaviors of the people above them. And I've worked in firms where I can pretty much work out whether the CFO is on a week's holiday or not, and I can measure that by the arrival time of the finance department. And they're in 2 hours earlier if the CFO's in. They come in later when they're not. So I think the shadow of the leader and whether the senior management really walk the talk is key to whether the sort of values and the visions are really just kind of slogans, or are they in the DNA of the of how the organization works. Equally, it seems clear that the diversity, inclusion and support of talent is becoming a real driver of success for many firms. And I think you mentioned that the battle for talent is probably something set to one side. But of course, whilst one might not have to battle so hard, retaining the talent that you've got is absolutely key critical. So the risk of skills and talent leakage as we go through this potential, you know, permanent change in the way in which we work will be key critical. I think a last point that resonates is that not one size fits all, and it's pretty clear that people are generally great, if they're allowed to sort of thrive in their own sort of diverse approach to life. And you know, really successful companies can demonstrate how a diverse workforce and the way it works, you know, is welcomed, is allowed to be embedded, and is regarded internally as a strength, rather than, you know, inconvenient differences that we have to kind of, in the world of, you know, in the current world, put up with. I think the other remark I would make is that the current situation has really tested the trust that exists between employer and employee. And you know, there are many firms, I'm sure, that we're all aware of, who work on the basis that if I don't see you, I don't trust that you'll be working. Well, that's now completely been tested. As you mentioned, there are many other ways in which you can actually validate whether somebody is paying attention to the work that they're being asked to do. But I think the whole trust position is really something that the time is right to really examine, and will dictate the future working practices. And I think, you know, the quest for the home life balance that you mentioned is fundamentally in the hands of the employer, to the extent that employees may feel that they have to compromise on that. And ultimately, I suppose, if they don't feel comfortable in compromising, they'll leave and try and find a role elsewhere. And I think, lastly, your point around marking when the day actually ends is key critical. And on a lighter note, I think there's a direct correlation between the number of feet between my desk and the fridge and the size of my waistline. So I think all your comments around health and nutrition are absolutely essential. So with that, I think we'll close the session. Just before you do, there are a few resources that have been noted on the chat drop down that might be of interest to you. Obviously, there is a series of other learning opportunities on the EMIC website. I must just draw your eye to the mentoring scheme that has been launched in the last couple of weeks. Have a look at the EMIC website for that, and if you're an aspiring mentee or mentor, don't hesitate to register. Let me say thank you very much indeed to Jo for a great session. Thank you for your participation, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.